Dr. Zach, please tell me about your musical background, however briefly or long you want to get into, but what makes you an expert, I guess?
Well, I've been making records myself for a long time. My first record I made in 1971, and then I still make records, so the life of the studio is well known to me. So then when I got into being a scholar, and I didn't initially think I would be doing it, about this recording studio. I thought it'd be something entirely different, but it worked out that way. So now it's sort of like, I kind of live with the thing all the time, because I'm either in the studio working, or I'm researching and writing about the studio. So after enough years, you kind of get to where you know something at least.
All right. So I guess to the Beatles now. In terms of Brian Epstein, manager Brian Epstein and producer George Martin, what roles did they have in the recording studio, and did they influence the Beatles in their songwriting greatly, or did Lennon and McCartney have much of the say into what went on records and albums and such?
Well, you have to separate songwriting and record production, really. First of all, I'd say Brian Epstein told them how to cut their hair and what kind of clothes to wear, and he was a good manager. He understood. They were really scruffy, They were a real punk band. And he understood how to market them and sell them, clean them up, how to take them to London, basically. Because they were a Liverpool group, London was a big city that they could hardly even imagine getting around in. So he was very instrumental in sort of getting them ready for the big time. But as musicians, they were fully formed as songwriters, and as players. They played a lot. A lot of rock bands were very amateur. Not the Beatles. They had played, hundreds of nights on the bandstand in Germany and the Cavern Club in Liverpool, night after night after night, on lunchtime concerts, day after day after day, just play. They knew all this repertory of other artists from the 50s, all of the American rock and roll of the 50s, they knew it. And the early 60s stuff, all the Motown, all the girl group stuff, they knew all that stuff, and they'd been writing their own songs since they were teenagers together, Lennon and McCartney, and had already developed a really, solid style and a clear kind of originality that they had even in their early songs, like I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. I mean, those are really original songs, So they didn't really need Martin so much for the songwriting, though. As they went along, and he sort of really became the fifth Beatle, they would run things by him too. But I mean, usually the songs were just about either Lennon or McCartney would do pretty much all of it, even if you put both of their names on it. Or early on they did more collaborating. A lot of times, one of them or the other one would have most of the song written, take it to the other and say, what do you think? And they say, well, I like it, but maybe we just add this part here. And they had that kind of collaboration. But usually the songs were good to go when they went to the studio. But that's where Martin took over, because he knew the recording studio, and they didn't, obviously, when they first got in there. They did their first album, 14 songs in one day. It's dum 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 dum, knock it out. If you could imagine, they must have been so exhausted to that. But he had been, producing it. Strangely enough, he'd been producing comedy records. That's what he was doing. And remember, the Beatles, nobody wanted to sign him. He was like the last guy that the tape went to, because everybody else had rejected him. And so when he took a chance on them, he actually was not any kind of well-known producer himself, because he did comedy, not music. He was trained as a composer, as a classical composer, piano player. And, he knew music, and when he got a chance to work with this group, he started to, cautiously at first. Like the first session, he didn't want to use Ringo. He wasn't sure if Ringo was really good enough musician. So a little cautious, but as he got into it, then he became really seduced by, their musical wit and charm, and just how good they were, how enthusiastic and energetic. And then when they started having hit records, forget about it. He was totally on board. And he really became the fifth Beatle. And by the time, a lot of their early stuff is just them playing just rock band sound. But certainly by the time they get to Help, when he wrote the arrangement, the string quartet arrangement for Yesterday, he was, at that point, from that point on, he was really instrumental in working on arrangements, bringing in all kinds of other instruments and sounds that they weren't used to writing for, didn't know how to write for. and they just come in and say, George, I got this idea, what do you think? And he'd go off and figure out how to do it,